I usually put these after the review because they're mostly a personal indulgence, but this time I've just got to say my piece. Go to this timestamp for the review. One of the more common self-deprecating jokes among Star Wars fans is the idea that the games weren't actually good, but you got to customize your lightsaber and hang out with cool droids, so 10 out of 10. Some people take that joke a little bit too seriously and turn it into a kind of nihilistic resignation in the face of EA's currently meager offering. But that misses so much about what made the prequel era of Star Wars games so special, and what makes EA's current handling of the property so frustrating. To their credit, EA has done a lot of work putting out a variety of mobile titles. You have a character collecting gacha game, a Diablo-style action RPG, an RTS, action shooters, and almost any mobile genre under the sun. There's a lot of diversity, and the games are mostly decent. In fact, they're on average better than LucasArts' mobile attempts besides Tiny Death Star or the Angry Birds crossover. Unfortunately, you'd have to take my word for it because all but one of the games I indirectly alluded to were cancelled after a couple of years. It also doesn't help that mobile, despite its ubiquity as a platform, gets viewed as some alien offshoot. The perceived gulf between mobile and, quote, mainstream, unquote, video games might as well be the same as the distance between video games and board games. So I don't blame anyone for looking at EA's current output as a meager 3 games in 5 years alongside 2 canceled projects and 1 closed studio. Which is a damn shame because Fantasy Flight has been killing it on the analog front. They're not just able to preserve the X-Wing miniatures game even after the Disney buyout, they pump out diverse new RPGs, board games, LCGs, and miniatures titles. What makes FFG's output really special, though, is their willingness to tie bits and pieces of canon not only from the new films, but from the broader array of comics, books, and TV shows. It serves as the perfect introduction to the wider expanded universe, and I had just as much fun playing these games as I do answering my friends' questions about Admiral Rey Sloane or Ketsu Onyo. The best part was that this introduction doesn't need a deep background. You can still have a great time even if you don't know that what Dr. Aphra's title as Rogue Archaeologist even means. EA hasn't really been able to facilitate these sorts of connections outside of Galaxy of Heroes and, ironically, Jedi Fallen Order. The Battlefronts do a fun job of giving you toys from all across the main movie trilogies, but they tend to only pull new characters from whatever the next film happens to be. There's no Ezra Bridger or Bylert Valance or Mr. Bones. To be fair, they did re-canonize the Republic Commandos and have them face off against their droid counterparts from the Clone Wars TV show, but the game's roster plays it fairly safe otherwise. There was a huge opportunity to connect people with all the cool stories being told all across every medium, but EA seems unable to capitalize on this outside of mobile. But why does that matter? Lucasfilm has been doing a really good job putting out quality books, comics, and TV shows, and Fantasy Flight has gone above and beyond with their board games. So what if EA drops the ball? There are plenty of stories worth exploring even without a fancy AAA or even quirky indie experience. But I think that fails to learn an important lesson from the prequel's current popular re-evaluation, and it runs the risk of severely impacting the sequel film's long-term reception. Before I can really dive into why, I'm going to need to spell out the differences between George's approach to promoting the prequels and Disney's current strategy. So from 1999 through 2005, George Lucas ran a full-court press marketing strategy for the prequels. Tons of toys, tie-in merchandise, books, comics, and games flooded the shelves to tie people over in between film releases and keep people's attention over the 6-year period. Crucially, the bulk of these expanded universe materials focus on the prequel trilogy, even after the fan backlash toward characters like Jar Jar Binks or scenes like I Hate Sand. Lucas stayed the course and centered everything around the films. Looking at just games released in this period alone, you have racing games, combat flight sims, Lego parodies, action-adventure games, and more, either fully dedicated to the prequels or crossing over prequel characters and props with the original trilogy. Things didn't balance themselves out until 2006, but that's also around the time LucasArts' overall game output slowed down and shifted to mobile and motion-controlled titles. Lucas was fine with this tsunami of content and stories because he did not care if he contradicted them later on with his films. Franchise coherence and quality control wasn't his highest priority, choosing instead to cherry-pick what he liked about the expanded universe and completely jettison the rest. It's an attitude he held to the very end, and even the Clone Wars ended up erasing a pandemic title of the same name, Gennady Tartakovsky's interpretation of the events, and the original Battlefront 2 from canon. Lucasfilm under Disney was taking a much different approach. Ironically, this strategy partially stems from the unfortunate decision to make Star Wars an annual film franchise, but in a less business-oriented sense, it also stems from the desire to preserve the sequel trilogy's storytelling flexibility. As a result, Disney has been pretty happy to more evenly explore the galaxy, but still puts most of its focus on the events between Order 66 and the Battle of Jakku. And this focus isn't just an accident as a result of trying to release Solo and Rogue One in between the sequel trilogy. The team at Lucasfilm under Disney wants to coordinate its massive multimedia franchise as best it can, rather than just leaving books, comics, and games to fend for themselves while privileging films and TV shows. However, they also wanted to give J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson the freedom to tell whatever story they wanted to with the sequels. A tidal wave of sequel content they didn't have a direct hand in would create a lot of unnecessary shackles, or risk jettisoning someone's work from canon just because they chose to make a comic rather than a movie. As a result, Disney has been much more restrained when exploring the period of time immediately before The Force Awakens, usually focusing on fun character vignettes which fill in the principal cast, rather than major factions' history or extensive world building beyond the most absolutely necessary. I think this is smart, and we still get a steady stream of stories set 30 years after Return of the Jedi. Plus, with the release of The Rise of Skywalker, Lucasfilm has also mentioned that they have opened up this period of time for more artists to run around in, and so we may yet get more adventures with Captain Sidon Ithano and his crew, or more opportunities to fly alongside Poe Dameron and Black Squadron. It's just too bad that EA couldn't contribute much more than 3 Battlefront 2 DLC levels before the sequel trilogy completes, because the ability to fight alongside Finn against the First Order or pilot the Fireball in defense of the Colossus would help people better connect to these and other stories set during the time period. I alluded to this before, but I firmly believe that a big part of the reason why the prequels had a kind of popular reevaluation is because of the games published during that time. Those 6 years saw the game industry begin to overtake music and film as a dominant force of entertainment on the planet. As a result, games could reach an audience as large, if not larger than any Star Wars film, potentially doubling its reach if the game was a well-built adaptation. And for the most part, LucasArts made a lot of well-built adaptations that allowed people to be present in the world of the prequels, while the prequels were still present in theaters. That's massively meaningful because the games get to act as a kind of escape valves for people's frustrations with the prequels themselves. Maybe they didn't like Jar Jar but adored pod racing. Well, here are a couple of racing games that put you at the center of it all, letting you battle against Sebulba and Anakin as any of the weird alien misfits you see in Episode 1. Likewise, if you fell in love with the Clone Army, you could load up Galactic Battlegrounds, either Battlefront game or Republic Commando to live out your Xerox Jango Fett fantasies. It's reasonable to look at all this very cynically. LucasArts' output was just an artless marketing push designed to put people to buy tickets for a trilogy of films that were less than the sum of their parts. But I feel like that ignores how wonderful many of these parts actually are, and trivializes the power of media adaptations, especially interactive ones like games, to recontextualize our relationship with other pieces of art. I think it's wonderful games like Bounty Hunter not only exist, but give people an opportunity to explore their favorite parts of a piece of art they might otherwise hate, and learning to let go of their anger. Unfortunately, EA has not provided the same opportunities for people frustrated with the sequel trilogies, but may be intrigued by the morsels of world building both Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams brought to Star Wars. You could have a really fascinating underworld crime story where you play as Han Solo and deal with Kanji Club or the Guavian Death Gang, or an open world survival game where you play as Rey on Jakku, or a high-octane F-Zero or Wipeout-style starship racing game inspired by the kind of racing we see in Star Wars Resistance. The galaxy is EA's oyster, with an infinite array of possibilities to better connect people with the world of the sequels, and while I think the sequels, even with the controversy surrounding The Last Jedi, will be better received than the prequels, I'm afraid people won't have the same opportunities to visit those films on their own terms, not by trying to decanonize what they hate, but by focusing on what they love. Thanks for watching.
Wait a minute, how did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Apparently not.
Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order lets you customize your lightsaber and hang out with cool droids, so 10 out of 10.
You must be very proud. I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
So I actually adore Jedi Fallen Order, and it's probably one of the best Star Wars games ever made, easily rivaling the likes of Knights of the Old Republic, Rogue Squadron, or the LEGO parodies. There's a lot to love, and it beautifully weaves together elements from across comics, TVs, and films into an exploration of the Force rarely seen in video games. There are some niggling technical issues though. They're not enough to dampen my enthusiasm for the game, but they're frequent enough to mention first, both to get out of the way and to set expectations. The first is graphical. I played on a regular PS4 and there were model and texture loading issues that didn't affect gameplay but were super noticeable. Controls are responsive but not always tight enough to smoothly meet certain platforming challenges, and loading times were long enough to be felt but short enough to be tolerable. Of course, I played on the Jedi Knight difficulty and didn't have to respawn frequently. I know that if I died a lot on Master or Grandmaster, the loading times would start to feel more oppressive. But in spite of all of that, Jedi Fallen Order delivers an experience far greater than the sum of its parts, and oh boy, are there a lot of parts. It's the LEGO Death Star of Star Wars video games, each immediately recognizable brick of Dark Souls combat, Metroid exploration, and Uncharted platforming locked together into a sculpture you recognize just as much for its components as for the franchise they're arrangement represents. Best of all, there's nothing quite like it in the canon of Star Wars games, with the closest example being The Force Unleashed. But even then, the story of Galen Merrick was much more Devil May Cry than Cal Kestis' reimagined Arkham series with lightsabers. If none of the games I mentioned mean anything to you, then I have good news, everyone. Jedi Fallen Order serves as the perfect introduction to all of them. It's very rare for a game to be so explicitly chimeric, and it's even rarer for the mechanics to hold together in the shape of a mythical beast throughout the whole experience, rather than collapse into a pile of writhing animal parts. More often than not, a game will cling to its chosen genre's conventions, mostly dallying in small experiments for their own sake rather than pushing the boundaries of a genre. This is good, and deeply exploring a genre's design space is an important part of any medium, but it also means that genres often act as silos. If I finish Guacamelee, I'm left with a good idea of what I like about Metroidvanias, so I can dive into Monster Tale or Xenodrifter. But there isn't an easy bridge for me to explore a game like Majora's Mask or Horizon Zero Dawn. Jedi Fallen Order can be that bridge precisely because the origins of its mechanical designs are so easy to tell apart. And this goes for both what you love and hate about the game. Enthralled by the depth of its combat, but want it to be faster and with less exploration? Go play Devil May Cry or any character action game. Love the linear platforming bits, but could do with less backtracking? Uncharted has got your back. Felt like the exploration was great, but you didn't want the strict guidance a Metroidvania's room structure provides? There's an ocean of Ubisoft-style open-world games at your fingertips. Loved everything about the game, but wanted to be even harder than Grandmaster? Go play Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Fallen Order is a Brazilian churrascaria of gameplay, with each meaty sampling providing a taste of almost every variant of action-adventure subgenres. Most importantly, Jedi Fallen Order's particular presentation places special attention on inexperienced accessibility. Every platform challenge and combat encounter builds on top of each other in a way that's easy to understand and welcoming to anyone with limited video game experience. This means that Fallen Order not only acts as a bridge between genres, but also as a gateway to a galaxy of action-adventure games. Adaptations in general, but Star Wars games in particular, pull people into new mediums by promising to deliver on a person's fantasy, and so how that fantasy gets delivered makes a huge difference in whether someone gets hooked into a hobby or walks away until the next adaptation comes along and fulfills the same promise. Speaking from my own personal experience, my love of arcade racing games like Wipeout was born from my time with Episode 1 Racer and its sequel Racer's Revenge. When I was done with Jedi Fallen Order, I wanted more, and I was super excited to try and tackle some of my backlog of action-adventure titles. I can only imagine what someone really new to the hobby and without a deep collection would feel. What's even better is that once you get the hang of its mechanics or have a bunch of other action-adventure games under your belt, the game beckons to be mastered and explored. Level shortcuts, hidden bosses, broad customization, and masterfully tuned difficulty settings all reward you for diving as deeply as you want without demanding that you meet it exclusively on its own terms. The only time Fallen Order intentionally breaks from tradition in terms of its level design is a lack of fast travel system. That isn't usually a problem because the game rewards you for finding cool shortcuts around a planet, and it enhances the feel of these levels being actual places you need to learn to maneuver around and explore rather than a collection of arbitrary checkpoints. But if you get to a highly formalist achievement hunting stage, it gets annoying crisscrossing an entire planet several times just to fill out the last percentage point on a map. But that's less an issue with the game's overall design and more a minor hiccup with how a particular mindset of play might get frustrating. Besides, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order lets you customize your lightsaber and hang out with cool droids. So 10 out of 10.